Some people say the dead tell no tales. 5-year-old Grace Miller was about to prove them wrong. It started with a German shepherd named Bella, going absolutely berserk in a murder trial, barking at an empty chair like her life depended on it. The seasoned police dog had never shown fear before, never lost control, never acted like she was seeing something that shouldn't exist. The defendant, Marcus Webb, insisted he was innocent. The evidence was circumstantial. The case was falling apart. Then Grace Miller took the witness stand. She was so small they had to adjust the microphone. So young, she clutched a stuffed rabbit for comfort. So traumatized, she hadn't spoken in 6 months after watching her mother's murder. But when Grace looked toward that empty jury chair and began describing her conversations with her dead mother, she didn't just break her silence. She shattered the boundary between the living and the dead. What happened next would make believers out of skeptics and prove that justice sometimes comes from the most impossible sources. The gavel's sharp crack echoed through the packed courtroom like a gunshot, but it did nothing to silence the German shepherd's relentless barking. Judge Patricia Morrison's weathered face flushed crimson as she raised the wooden hammer again, her voice cutting through the chaos with judicial authority. Order! I will have order in this courtroom. But Bella, the decorated police dog, paid no heed to human commands. Her powerful frame tensed as she fixed her intense amber eyes on jury seat number 7, completely empty, yet somehow the source of her inexplicable agitation. Each bark reverberated off the mahogany-paneled walls, drowning out the whispered conversations and shuffling papers of the morning's proceedings. Detective Sarah Chen felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment as she tugged gently on Bella's leash. In their 4 years as partners, through drug busts, missing person cases, and crime scene investigations, Bella had never, not once, behaved like this. The dog's service record was impeccable. 3 commendations for bravery, countless successful operations, and a reputation among the force as the most reliable K-9 unit in the precinct. Bella, down, Sarah whispered urgently, her voice carrying a note of desperation she'd never heard from herself before. What's gotten into you, girl? The courtroom buzzed with uncomfortable energy. Spectators craned their necks, some standing to get a better view of the disruption. The jury members shifted uneasily in their seats, all except for seat 7, which remained hauntingly vacant due to a juror's last-minute illness. Prosecutor James Rivera, a distinguished man in his 50s with silver threading through his dark hair, stood behind his table with practiced patience. His sharp suit and confident demeanor had intimidated countless defendants, but today, brutal murder of social worker Jennifer Miller, and he couldn't afford disruptions. At the defense table, Linda Hayes adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses nervously. The seasoned defense attorney had built her reputation on meticulous preparation and unshakable composure, but the dog's behavior was throwing her off balance. She glanced at her client, Marcus Webb, whose pale face had grown even whiter since Bella's outburst began. Marcus sat rigid in his chair, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles had turned bone white. At 32, he possessed the kind of unremarkable features that made him blend into crowds: medium height, brown hair, forgettable face. But today, with sweat beading on his forehead despite the courtroom's cool temperature, he looked anything but invisible. His eyes darted between Bella and the empty chair, a muscle twitching in his jaw with each bark. "Your Honor," Detective Chen called out, rising from her seat in the gallery, "I sincerely apologize. This behavior is completely unprecedented. Bella has never—" "Detective Chen?" Judge Morrison interrupted, her voice sharp with frustration. "Remove that animal from my courtroom immediately, or I'll hold you in contempt." But as Sarah moved to comply, something extraordinary happened. Bella's barking intensified, becoming almost frantic, and she began pulling toward the empty chair with such force that Sarah had to brace herself to keep from being dragged across the courtroom floor. The spectators' murmurs grew louder. Some looked frightened, others curious. An elderly man in the back row whispered to his wife, "That dog sees something we don't." A young reporter frantically scribbled notes, sensing a story that would write itself. James Rivera cleared his throat. "Your Honor, perhaps we could proceed with the dog present? I understand Detective Chen and her partner were first responders to the crime scene. Their presence might be beneficial to the proceedings." Judge Morrison's gray eyes narrowed as she studied the scene before her. Bella had stopped barking but remained fixated on the empty chair, her entire body quivering with an energy that seemed almost electric. The dog's ears were pricked forward, her head tilted as if listening to something only she could hear. "This is highly irregular," the judge muttered, then raised her voice. "Detective Chen, can you control your animal?" "Yes, Your Honor, I believe so." Sarah's voice carried more confidence than she felt. She knelt beside Bella, running her hand along the dog's muscled back. "Easy, girl, easy." The courtroom held its collective breath as Bella gradually settled into a sitting position, though her gaze never wavered from seat 7. Her tail remained still, her body language speaking of vigilant watching rather than relaxed obedience. Defense Attorney Hayes rose slowly. "Your Honor, I must object to the continued presence of this disruption. My client has the right to a fair trial, free from intimidation or prejudicial influences." "Noted, Counselor," Judge Morrison replied curtly. She studied Bella for a long moment, then made a decision that would alter the course of the entire trial. "The dog may remain, provided there are no further outbursts. Detective Chen, you are personally responsible for your partner's behavior." As the judge's words settled over the courtroom, a strange quiet descended. Even Bella seemed to sense the weight of the moment, maintaining her vigil over the empty chair with unwavering intensity. The seat seemed to draw every eye in the room, as if it held secrets that demanded attention. Marcus Webb's breathing became shallow and rapid. He leaned toward his attorney, whispering something urgent in her ear. Linda Hayes's expression grew troubled as she listened, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine concern. The empty chair sat like a silent witness, bathed in the morning light streaming through the tall windows, waiting for whatever truth was about to unfold. The heavy courtroom doors opened with a soft whoosh, and a hush fell over the assembled crowd as Eleanor Miller stepped inside, her weathered hand gently guiding her 5-year-old granddaughter. Eleanor, at 68, carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived life's worst storms. Her silver hair pulled back in a simple bun, her black dress speaking of mourning that had not yet found its end. But it was the child beside her who commanded every eye in the room. Grace Miller was small, even for her age, with her mother's delicate features and enormous blue eyes that seemed to hold depths far beyond her years. Her blonde hair had been carefully braided, and she wore a navy dress with white flowers, the same dress her mother had bought her for Easter, just 2 months before the murder. In her tiny hands she clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit, its pink fur faded from countless nights of comfort. The moment Grace entered, Bella's entire demeanor changed. The German shepherd's head snapped around, her tail giving a tentative wag as she watched the little girl's approach. For the first time since entering the courtroom, Bella's attention wavered from the empty chair. Grace noticed immediately. While the adults around her moved with the careful precision of legal procedure, the child's eyes went straight to the agitated dog. She stopped walking, causing Eleanor to pause mid-step. "Grandma Ellie," Grace whispered, her voice carrying in the suddenly silent courtroom. "Why is the pretty doggy upset?" Eleanor's face crumpled slightly, her protective instincts warring with her granddaughter's innocent curiosity. "Hush, sweetheart. We need to be very quiet now." But Grace had already pulled free from her grandmother's gentle grip. With the fearless confidence that only children possess, She walked directly toward Bella, her small Mary Jane shoes clicking softly on the polished floor. The courtroom watched in fascination. The traumatized child approached the powerful police dog without hesitation. Detective Chen tensed, ready to intervene, but something in Grace's manner, calm, purposeful, almost knowing, made her pause. Bella, sensing the child's approach, slowly turned from her vigil at the empty chair and fixed her amber eyes on Grace. "Hello, doggy," Grace said softly, extending her free hand, palm up, in the universal gesture of friendship. "I'm Grace. What's your name?" "Her name is Bella," Detective Chen found herself saying, her voice gentler than she'd intended. "She's usually very friendly, but today she's been different." Grace nodded solemnly, as if this explanation made perfect sense. She reached out and gently stroked Bella's head, and the dog immediately relaxed under her touch, a soft whine escaping her throat. "She sees things," Grace said matter-of-factly, continuing to pet Bella. "Dogs can see things people can't always see. Isn't that right, Bella?" The dog's tail wagged once, as if in agreement. Bailiff Tom Anderson, a gentle giant of a man with kind eyes and graying temples, had been watching the interaction with growing amazement. He'd worked courthouse security for 15 years and had never seen anything quite like this. As Grace looked up at him with those penetrating blue eyes, he felt something tug at the sleeve of his uniform jacket. "Mister?" Grace's small voice was barely above a whisper, but in the hushed courtroom, every word carried. "The doggy is upset because she sees something scary. But it's not scary to me." Tom knelt down to Grace's level, his voice equally soft. "What does Bella see, sweetheart?" Grace turned and pointed directly at jury seat number 7, the same empty chair that had been driving Bella to distraction. "Bella sees Mommy, too." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. The courtroom, already silent, seemed to stop breathing entirely. Judge Morrison's gavel remained motionless in her raised hand. James Rivera's pen froze halfway through a note. Even Marcus Webb stopped his nervous fidgeting and stared at the child with an expression of horror and disbelief. "Grace," Eleanor whispered, rushing to her granddaughter's side. "Honey, what did you say?" But Grace's attention had returned to Bella, who was now wagging her tail more enthusiastically, as if finally finding someone who understood her distress. The child looked up at her grandmother with perfect innocence. "Mommy sits in that chair every day," Grace explained, her voice carrying the simple certainty of childhood truth. "She comes to watch the trial. She wants to make sure the scary man gets in trouble for hurting her." The reactions were immediate and varied. Several jurors gasped audibly. An older woman in the gallery began crying. "Extraordinary." Defense attorney Linda Hayes shot to her feet. "Your Honor, I object. This is clearly—" "Sit down, counselor," Judge Morrison said quietly, her eyes never leaving Grace. The judge had presided over family court for 10 years before moving to criminal cases, and she had learned to recognize when a child was speaking from genuine belief rather than coached testimony. Prosecutor Rivera felt his heart hammering in his chest. He had prepared for this moment, Grace's victim impact statement, but nothing could have prepared him for this. He glanced at Marcus Webb and saw something that chilled him. The defendant was staring at the empty chair with obvious terror. "Grace," the prosecutor said gently, approaching the child with careful respect, "can you tell us more about what you see?" Grace looked at him with those impossibly wise eyes, then back at the empty chair. "Mommy looks sad, but not hurt anymore. She has her pretty yellow dress on, the one she wore to my school play. She smiles at me when I look at her, but she watches the scary man mostly. She pointed directly at Marcus Webb, who visibly flinched. "She wants him to say he's sorry." Grace continued with devastating innocence. "She says sorry helps people feel better, even when bad things happen." The courtroom erupted in whispered conversations. Some spectators looked skeptical, others seemed deeply moved. But it was Marcus Webb's reaction that captured everyone's attention. He had gone completely white and was staring at Grace as if she had reached into his soul and pulled out his darkest secrets. Judge Morrison struggled to maintain her judicial composure while grappling with something that defied all legal precedent. "Mr. Rivera, is this part of the child's testimony?" "Your Honor, Rivera found himself at a loss for words. In 23 years of prosecuting cases, he had never encountered anything like this. Grace, oblivious to the chaos she had created, continued petting Bella, who had now settled completely and was gazing at the empty chair with calm attention rather than agitation. "It's okay, Bella," Grace whispered to the dog. "Mommy's not stuck anymore. She's just waiting for the right time to say goodbye." The small kitchen in the Miller house had always been the heart of their home, filled with the warm scents of cinnamon toast and Grace's favorite hot chocolate. Jennifer Miller, 28 years old, with the same blonde hair and blue eyes as her daughter, knelt on the linoleum floor, helping Grace organize her collection of ceramic horses. "This one's Starlight," Grace announced, holding up a small white figurine, "and this one's Thunder. They're best friends, just like me and you, Mommy." Jennifer's heart swelled as she watched her daughter's difficult case at work, offering hugs without being asked, and drawing pictures of rainbows to chase away the sadness. "That's right, baby girl," Jennifer said, tucking a strand of Grace's hair behind her ear. "Best friends forever." Jennifer worked as a social worker for the county, specializing in cases involving children from troubled homes. It was heartbreaking work that paid little, but meant everything to her. She had grown up in foster care herself, bouncing between homes until Eleanor and Frank Miller took her in at 15. They had given her stability, love, and most importantly, hope. When Frank passed away 3 years ago, the bond between Jennifer and Eleanor had only grown stronger. "Mommy," Grace said thoughtfully, lining up her horses in a careful parade, "why do some kids not have mommies and daddies who love them?" It was a question Jennifer had been dreading, but knew would come eventually. Her work often brought dangerous situations to their doorstep: angry parents, custody disputes, threats from those who didn't want social services interfering with their lives. She had always tried to shield Grace from that darkness. "Some grown-ups have very sick hearts," Jennifer explained carefully. "And when your heart is sick, sometimes you forget how to love properly. That's why Mommy tries to help fix those sick hearts." Grace nodded with the solemn understanding of a child who accepted that adults sometimes needed help too. "Maybe your love can make their hearts better." Jennifer hugged her daughter tightly, breathing in the sweet scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Maybe it can, sweetheart. Maybe it can." The night that changed everything. Grace's bedroom was painted soft lavender, with glow-in-the-dark stars scattered across the ceiling that Jennifer had carefully applied in actual constellation patterns. It was nearly midnight when the sound of breaking glass shattered the peaceful silence of their home. Jennifer jolted awake instantly, her maternal instincts screaming danger. She crept to Grace's room and found her daughter sitting up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide with fear. "Mommy?" Grace whispered. "There's a scary noise." "I know, baby. I need you to do exactly what Mommy says, okay?" Jennifer's voice remained calm despite her racing heart. "Remember the game we practiced? About hiding in your special place?" Grace nodded. They had rehearsed this scenario, though Jennifer had always prayed they'd never need it. Working with troubled families meant preparing for worst-case scenarios. "Go to your closet, behind the big box of winter clothes. Hide there and don't come out until you hear Mommy say, "All clear, okay?" No matter what. What if I get scared? Then you hold your bunny tight and remember that Mommy loves you more than all the stars in the sky. Jennifer kissed Grace's forehead quickly. Now go, quickly. Grace scrambled into her closet and Jennifer carefully positioned the storage box to conceal her daughter. Through the slats in the closet door, Grace could see her mother grab the baseball bat Frank had given Jennifer for protection and move toward the bedroom door. What happened next would haunt Grace's dreams for months to come. From her hiding place, Grace heard her mother's voice, strong and commanding. "You don't belong here. Leave now, and no one gets hurt." A man's voice, rough and unfamiliar. "Where is it? I know she keeps it here somewhere." "I don't know what you're talking about. Please, just leave." Then came the sounds, scuffling, something crashing, her mother crying out. Grace pressed her hands over her ears, but couldn't block out her mother's voice, fierce even in fear. "You stay away from my daughter. She's just a baby." The little girl squeezed her eyes shut and whispered to her stuffed rabbit, "Mommy's fighting the monster, but she'll win. Mommy's always win." But monsters, Grace would learn, sometimes win too. When Detective Sarah Chen and Bella arrived at the house 40 minutes later, responding to a neighbor's 911 call, they found Jennifer Miller's body in the living room. The house had been ransacked, but it was Bella's behavior that Chen found most disturbing. The dog had immediately focused on the closet in Grace's room, whining and pawing at the storage box until Chen moved it aside. Grace was found curled in a tight ball, still clutching her rabbit, her blue eyes staring at nothing. She hadn't spoken a single word since that night, not to the paramedics, not to the grief counselors, not even to Eleanor when she arrived to take custody. Present day. Eleanor Miller stood in the courthouse hallway, watching through the window as Grace continued to pet Bella and speak quietly to the empty chair. At 68, Eleanor had thought she'd experienced every kind of loss life could offer. Her husband's death, watching Jennifer struggle as a single mother, and now this unthinkable tragedy. But Grace's silence over the past 6 months had been perhaps the most heartbreaking part of all. The little girl, who had once chattered constantly, who had asked 1,000 questions about everything from butterflies to the moon, had retreated into a world where words seemed too dangerous to use. Eleanor had taken her to specialist after specialist, but Grace remained locked in her trauma-induced mutism, until today, until she saw Bella and began speaking about her mother, as if Jennifer were sitting right there in the courtroom. Detective Chen approached Eleanor carefully, her expression troubled. "Mrs. Miller, I need to ask, has Grace ever shown signs of seeing things that others can't see?" Eleanor's protective instincts flared. "My granddaughter is not delusional, detective. She's been through hell." Window. Grace was now sitting cross-legged beside Bella, both of them facing the empty chair as if watching an invisible presence. The dog's tail wagged occasionally, and Grace would nod, as if responding to conversation only she could hear. "Jennifer always said Grace was special," Eleanor admitted quietly. "She had an uncanny ability to sense things. When Jennifer had difficult cases, when other children were sad, even when Frank was getting sick, before any of us realized how ill he was. Jennifer called it Grace's gift." Detective Chen felt a chill run down her spine. She was a practical woman, trained in evidence and facts, but she had learned to trust Bella's instincts implicitly. If the dog sensed something in that empty chair, there was a reason. "What if," Chen said slowly, "what if they're both sensing something real? Something we can't perceive, but they can. Eleanor turned to study the detective's face. "You're talking about ghosts, detective? Spirits?" "I'm talking about justice," Chen replied firmly. "Your daughter was murdered, and her killer is sitting in that courtroom, probably thinking he's going to get away with it. But Grace might be the key to making sure he doesn't." Through the window, they watched as Grace stood up and walked to the empty chair. She reached out as if taking someone's hand, then returned to Bella's side. "Mommy says it's time to go back in now," Grace announced, her clear voice carrying through the partially open door. "She says the scary man needs to hear what really happened." Eleanor felt tears blur her vision. For 6 months, she had prayed for Grace to speak again. She had never imagined that when her granddaughter finally found her voice, it would be to speak for the dead. Detective Chen knelt beside Bella, running her hand through the dog's thick fur. "You've been trying to tell us something, haven't you, girl? You've been trying to tell us that Jennifer Miller is still fighting for justice." Bella's tail thumped against the floor once, as if in agreement. As they prepared to return to the courtroom, Eleanor took Grace's small hand in hers. "Sweetheart, are you sure about what you're seeing?" Grace looked up at her grandmother with those impossibly wise blue eyes. "Mommy says not everyone can see her, but that's okay. She says love doesn't stop just because someone goes to heaven. It just changes how it helps people." The weight of seeking justice for Jennifer Miller and protecting Grace suddenly felt different to everyone involved. They were no longer just pursuing a criminal case, they were honoring a mother's love that refused to be silenced even by death. As they walked back toward the courtroom doors, Grace paused and looked back at the empty hallway behind them. "She's coming too," Grace said simply. Mommy never misses the witness stand, where 5-year-old Grace Miller sat swinging her legs. He felt his usual courtroom confidence waver. The child looked impossibly small in the adult-sized chair, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms, her blue eyes wide but remarkably calm. "Hello, Grace," Rivera said gently, his voice softer than anyone in the courtroom had ever heard it. "My name is Mr. Rivera. Is it okay if I ask you some questions?" Grace nodded solemnly, then turned toward the empty jury chair. "Mommy says you're one of the good guys," she said matter-of-factly. "She says you're trying to help." A ripple of unease passed through the courtroom. Judge Morrison leaned forward slightly, her experienced eyes studying the child with intense curiosity. Rivera felt his heart rate quicken. This was uncharted territory. "Grace, can you tell us about the night when the scary thing happened at your house?" The little girl's grip tightened on her rabbit, but her voice remained steady. "I was sleeping with Mr. Bunny when the loud noise woke me up. Mommy came to my room really fast and told me to play the hiding game." "Can you tell us about the hiding game?" "Mommy taught me that if something scary ever happened, I should hide in my closet, behind the big box, and be very, very quiet. Like hide and seek, but more important." Grace's matter-of-fact tone belied the gravity of her words. "Mommy said hiding games keep little girls safe." Rivera exchanged a glance with Detective Chen, who was sitting with Bella in the front row. The dog remained calm, but alert, her attention split between Grace and the empty chair. "And what happened after you hid in your special place?" Grace's small voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but in the silent courtroom, every word carried with devastating clarity. I heard Mommy talking to the scary man. She told him to go away, but he wouldn't listen. He kept asking about something she was hiding, but Mommy said she didn't know. Did you hear what the man sounded like? He had a mean voice, like when people are angry, but trying not to yell. Grace paused, looking again toward the empty chair, as if receiving guidance. Mommy says I should tell about the whistle. Defense attorney Linda Hayes half rose from her seat. Your Honor, the child is clearly overruled, Judge Morrison said firmly. Continue, Mr. Rivera. What whistle, Grace? The scary man made a whistle sound when he was thinking. Not a happy whistle, like when people are walking. With tissues. Even the court reporter paused in her transcription, overcome by the child's innocent recounting of such horror. Rivera knelt down to Grace's eye level. Grace, I know this is hard. Can you tell us about when the police came? Immediately, Grace's demeanor brightened. That's when Bella came, the pretty doggie with the police officers. She ran right to my hiding place and found me, even though I was being very quiet. She turned to smile at Bella, who wagged her tail in recognition. Bella knew something was wrong right away. She kept sniffing around and whining, like she was sad too. Did Bella seem to notice anything special about the house? Oh yes. Grace's voice became animated. She kept looking around, like she was watching someone walking, but the police officers couldn't see who she was watching. I knew, though. The courtroom tension ratcheted up another notch. Rivera felt like he was walking on a tightrope between breakthrough and chaos. Who was Bella watching, Grace? Mommy, of course. Grace said this with such innocent certainty that it sent chills through everyone present. Mommy didn't leave when the scary man hurt her. She stayed to make sure I was okay. Defense attorney Hayes stood up abruptly. Your Honor, I must object. This child has clearly been traumatized and coached. This testimony is inadmissible and prejudicial. Judge Morrison studied Grace carefully. The child showed no signs of coaching or manipulation, just pure, heartbreaking honesty. Objection noted, but overruled. The witness may continue. Rivera felt sweat beading on his forehead. Grace, you said your mommy is still around. She never left, Grace replied simply, pointing directly at jury seat number 7. She sits right there, every day during the trial. She wants to make sure the scary man gets in trouble for hurting her. The jury members followed Grace's pointing finger, staring at the empty chair, with expressions ranging from skepticism to wonder to outright fear. The juror sitting in seat number 6 actually scooted his chair away from the empty space. Can you see your mommy right now? Of course I can see her. Grace's voice carried the exasperation of a child, explaining something obvious to a confused adult. She's wearing her pretty yellow dress with the flowers, the one she wore to my school play. Her hair is fixed nice, not messy like it was that scary night. Marcus Webb made a strangled sound from the defense table, causing every head to turn toward him. His face had gone ash white, and his hands were trembling visibly. She looks happy to see me, Grace continued, oblivious to the defendant's distress. But Bailiff Anderson, who had seen every kind of testimony in his 15 years, found himself blinking back moisture. Grace, Rivera said carefully, does your mommy talk to you? All the time, Grace replied matter-of-factly. She tells me she's proud of me for being brave and that she loves me more than all the stars. But she's worried, too. Worried about what? Grace looked directly at Marcus Webb, her innocent blue eyes meeting his terrified stare. She's worried the scary man is still scared to tell the truth. She says telling the truth makes people feel better, even when they've done bad things. The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to have weight. Marcus Webb was staring at Grace as if she had materialized from his worst nightmare, his breathing rapid and shallow. Rivera knew he was standing at the crossroads of legal history. Nothing in his training had prepared him for this moment, but every instinct told him that Grace was somehow, impossibly, telling the truth. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted from mere legal proceeding to something approaching the supernatural. Grace remained in the witness chair, but her attention had turned completely toward the empty jury seat, her small body angled as if listening intently to conversation only she could hear. "Grace," Prosecutor Rivera said gently, trying to regain her attention, "can you tell us more about what your mommy is saying?" But Grace held up one small hand in a gesture that was heartbreakingly mature. "Wait, please. Mommy's talking." She nodded seriously toward the empty chair, her blue eyes focused with laser intensity on something invisible to everyone else. The courtroom watched in fascination and growing unease as Grace carried on what appeared to be a detailed conversation with thin air. Her head tilted to one side, listening. Then she would nod or shake her head in response to unheard questions. "Yes, Mommy, I remember," Grace said softly to the chair. "You told me to be brave." Then, turning back to Rivera, she announced, "Mommy wants me to tell you about the smell." Defense Attorney Hayes shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this is a travesty of justice. The child is clearly having a psychological episode." "Sit down, Counselor," Judge Morrison commanded, her voice carrying an authority that brooked no argument. "I want to hear what the child has to say." Grace continued as if the interruption hadn't occurred. "The scary man smelled like when Daddy Frank used to fix his car. Oil and metal, but also something has a mark on his hand that looks like a half moon." Rivera felt his pulse quicken. None of these details had been released to the media or discussed in open court. If Grace was somehow accessing information only the perpetrator would know, Grace turned back to the empty chair, nodding solemnly. "Mommy says she fought really hard because she was scared he would hurt me too. She grabbed something from him when they were fighting." The little girl's conversation with the invisible presence became more animated, her side of the dialogue peppered with "uh-huh" and "I understand," and "that's really important, isn't it?" Marcus Webb was gripping the edge of the defense table so hard his knuckles had gone white. A thin sheen of sweat had broken out across his forehead despite the courtroom's cool temperature. "Your Honor," Hayes tried again, her voice strained, "this child needs psychological evaluation, not—" Grace's clear voice cut through the objection. "Mommy says the scary lady in the glasses should listen instead of talking so much." She pointed directly at Linda Hayes. "Mommy says the truth wants to come out, and fighting it just makes everything harder." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Hayes stumbled backward as if physically struck, her professional composure cracking completely. "She also says," Grace continued with devastating innocence, "that the scary man keeps touching his left hand because that's where she scratched him and left a mark." All eyes turned to Marcus Webb, who instinctively covered his left hand with his right. Detective Chen was already making notes, her mind racing through the evidence collected at the crime scene. Jennifer Miller had defensive wounds on her hands. They'd found skin under her fingernails. Grace's attention returned to the empty chair, her expression becoming more serious. "Mommy's worried because she says the scary man is getting more scared instead of feeling better. She says scared people do dangerous things sometimes." Judge Morrison felt a chill run down her spine. In 30 years on the bench, she had developed an intuition about truth and lies, and every fiber of her being was telling her that this child was somehow accessing genuine information. "Grace," Rivera said carefully, "is your mommy telling you anything else about that night?" "She says she hid something important before the scary man could find it. Something that would help prove he was there." Grace tilted her head, listening again. "She says it's in a place where I keep my treasures safe." The heating vent in Grace's room. Detective Chen suddenly remembered the child's obsession with hiding small toys and trinkets in the vent opening near her bed. They had checked the room thoroughly, but hadn't thought to examine the ductwork itself. Grace suddenly stood up in the witness chair, causing Bailiff Anderson to move forward protectively. But the child wasn't trying to leave. She was pointing at Marcus with unwavering directness that only children possess.
"Mommy says you need to stop being so scared and just tell everyone what you did,"
Grace said to the defendant, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom with bell-like clarity.
"She says she forgives you, but you have to be brave enough to tell the truth."
Marcus Webb made a sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp, his entire body beginning to shake. The man who had maintained his innocence throughout months of investigation was staring at a 5-year-old child as if she held the keys to his salvation and damnation simultaneously.
"She's not angry anymore?"
Grace continued, her voice gentle with childlike compassion.
"She's just sad that you're hurting yourself by keeping the secret. Secrets make people sick inside."
Judge Morrison realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in legal history. Whether one believed in supernatural communication or not, the child was providing information that could only have come from someone present at the crime scene.
"Recess,"
the judge announced abruptly, her gavel echoing through the stunned courtroom.
15-minute recess. I need to speak with counsel in my chambers immediately.
As the courtroom began to empty, Grace remained in the witness chair, continuing her one-sided conversation with the empty jury seat. Eleanor Miller approached hesitantly, her grandmother's heart breaking at the sight of her granddaughter carrying on such a mature conversation with the spirit she claimed to see.
"Sweetheart,
Eleanor whispered.
are you okay?"
Grace turned to her grandmother with a radiant smile.
"Mommy says she's proud of me for being so brave, and she says to tell you that she loves you too, Grandma Ellie, and that Grandpa Frank is taking good care of her in heaven."
Eleanor felt her knees go weak. Frank had been dead for 3 years, and Grace had never heard anyone call her Grandma Ellie except Jennifer and Frank. During the recess, the hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with nervous energy. Legal professionals, reporters, and spectators clustered in small groups, their conversations dominated by what they had just witnessed. Some spoke in hushed, awed tones about the possibility of genuine supernatural communication. Others argued vehemently that the child was either severely traumatized or somehow coached. Near the defendant's consultation room, Marcus Webb paced in tight circles while his attorney, Linda Hayes, tried desperately to maintain professional calm. The strain of the morning's proceedings had pushed both of them to their breaking points.
"This is insane, Linda,"
Marcus muttered, running his hands through his hair repeatedly.
"How could that kid possibly know those things? Nobody knew about—"
He stopped himself mid-sentence.
"About what, Marcus?"
Hayes demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion that had been building all morning.
"What exactly didn't anybody know about?"
Marcus continued his agitated pacing, a nervous energy, radiating from him like heat from a furnace. Without even realizing it, he began producing a soft, tuneless whistle, the same unconscious habit he'd developed as a child when anxiety overwhelmed him. The sound was barely audible, just a soft rush of air through pursed lips, but it carried down the hallway with devastating clarity. Grace, who had been sitting quietly beside her grandmother on a bench near the courtroom doors, suddenly went rigid. Her blue eyes widened, and her small hands gripped her stuffed rabbit so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That's it," she whispered, her voice carrying in the relatively quiet hallway. "That's the scary whistle Mommy told me about." Eleanor looked around, confused. "What whistle, sweetheart?" But Grace was already pointing down the hallway toward where Marcus Webb stood with his attorney, completely unaware that his nervous habit had just provided the most damning evidence yet. "That man," Grace said, her child's voice carrying clearly in the hushed corridor. "That's the whistle the scary man made when he was in our house. Mommy remembers it." The effect was immediate and electric. Detective Chen, who had been reviewing her notes nearby, snapped her head up at Grace's words. Other people in the hallway began turning, following Grace's pointing finger to where Marcus Webb continued his unconscious whistling. Bella, who had been lying calmly at Detective Chen's feet, suddenly came alert. The German shepherd's ears perked forward, and a low growl began building in her throat as she focused intently on Marcus Webb. Her reaction was identical to her behavior in the courtroom, the same intense focus, the same inexplicable agitation. "Dear God," Chen whispered, making the connection instantly. At the crime scene, she had noted in her report that Bella seemed particularly disturbed by something in the bedroom area, constantly sniffing and circling as if trying to track a scent that led nowhere. She had attributed it to the violence that had occurred, but now Marcus Webb, still lost in his anxious whistling, was oblivious to the attention he had drawn until Linda Hayes grabbed his arm with enough force to bruise. "Stop that," she hissed urgently. "Stop that sound right now." But it was too late. Grace had stood up from the bench and was walking toward them with the fearless directness that had characterized her entire morning. Eleanor hurried after her granddaughter, but Grace moved with purpose that seemed far beyond her 5 years. "Excuse me, mister," Grace said politely, looking up at Marcus Webb with those penetrating blue eyes. "Why do you make the same whistle the scary man made when he hurt my mommy?" The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his face draining of all color, as he stared down at the small girl who somehow knew his most unconscious habit. A habit he'd had since childhood, something he did when or seemed to notice. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his voice cracked on the words. Grace tilted her head, studying him with the same intense focus she'd shown when listening to her invisible mother. "Mommy says you're still scared. She says the whistle used to help you feel better when you were little, but now it just makes you remember bad things." Bella's growl intensified, and Detective Chen had to hold the dog's leash firmly to keep her from advancing on Marcus Webb. The German shepherd's entire body was tense, her hackles raised, her intelligent eyes fixed on the defendant with unmistakable recognition. "How," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible, "how could you possibly—" "Mommy tells me things," Grace replied simply. "She says you whistled when you were looking for something in our house. And then you whistled when you got scared after you hurt her. She remembers because it was the last sound she heard before—" The child's voice trailed off, but the implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Linda Hayes felt her professional world crumbling around her. Every ethical principle she'd built her career on was warring with the growing certainty that her client was not only guilty, but somehow being exposed by forces beyond legal understanding. Prosecutor Rivera, emerging from Judge Morrison's chambers, stopped dead in his tracks as he witnessed the confrontation in the hallway. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The child's supernatural knowledge, the dog's recognition, and now this unconscious revelation from the defendant himself. "Marcus," Hayes said urgently, pulling her client toward the consultation room, "don't say another word." But Marcus seemed unable to look away from Grace, his breathing becoming increasingly rapid and shallow. "She's just a kid," he muttered to himself. "She's just a little kid. How does she know? How does she know?" Grace approached closer, her expression filled with the kind of compassion that only children can possess. Pure, uncomplicated, and devastatingly honest. "Mommy says you don't have to be scared anymore," she told him gently. "She says telling the truth makes the scared feeling go away. She's not mad at you. She just wants you to stop hurting inside." The words hit Marcus Webb like a sledgehammer. For months, he had been living with the crushing weight of what he'd done, the images of that night playing on endless loop in his mind. The fear, the guilt, the growing paranoia that somehow, someday, the truth would surface. And now here was this impossible child, claiming to speak for the woman he'd killed, offering him something he'd never expected and didn't feel he deserved: forgiveness. Detective Chen watched the interaction with growing amazement. Bella's behavior, Grace's knowledge, and now Marcus's obvious recognition of details only the perpetrator should know. It was building into a case unlike anything in her experience. The hallway had fallen completely silent, everyone present sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the most skeptical observers could see that Grace's innocent revelations were having a profound psychological impact on the defendant. As Judge Morrison's voice called for the end of recess, the various parties began moving back toward the courtroom. But the dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Grace's supernatural claims were gaining credibility with each passing moment, and Marcus Webb was beginning to crack under the impossible pressure of being confronted by his victim's daughter, a daughter who seemed to know things that defied all rational explanation. The whistle had been the key that opened a door Marcus Webb had desperately tried to keep locked. Now, with that door beginning to swing open, everyone involved sensed that the truth, however impossible its source, was finally ready to emerge. When court reconvened after the recess, the atmosphere had fundamentally changed. The earlier skepticism had given way to a tense anticipation, as if everyone present sensed they were witnessing something that would redefine their understanding of justice itself. Grace returned to the witness stand with the same calm composure she had displayed all morning, her stuffed rabbit tucked securely in her arms. Prosecutor Rivera approached her with renewed purpose, the hallway encounter having crystallized his strategy. "Grace, before we took our break, you were telling us about your mommy. Is she still here with us?" Grace looked toward jury seat number 7 and nodded solemnly. "She never leaves during the important parts. She says this is the most important part of all. Can you tell us what she's saying now?" The little girl's expression grew serious beyond her years. "She's telling me about the last thing she did before the scary man hurt her. She wants everyone to know she was brave even when she was scared." Rivera felt his heart racing. "What did your mommy do, Grace?" "She hid my special necklace," Grace said, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone children use when explaining something perfectly obvious. "The one with the little heart that has our picture inside. She didn't want the scary man to take it because it was my most precious thing." Eleanor Miller gasped from the gallery, her hand flying to cover her mouth. The locket had been Jennifer's first gift to Grace on her 3rd birthday, a tiny gold heart containing photos of mother and daughter. It had been Grace's most treasured possession, never removed except for baths. In the chaos following the murder, Eleanor had assumed it was lost forever. "Where did your mommy hide the necklace, sweetheart?" Grace closed her eyes for a moment, as if listening to instructions only she could hear. "In the kitchen, behind the big vent where the warm air comes out. She had to be very quick and very quiet so the scary man wouldn't see." Detective Chen leaned forward in her seat, her mind racing. The kitchen heating vent. They had searched the house thoroughly, but the ductwork itself had been considered beyond a perpetrator's reach during a violent struggle. "Mommy says she pushed it far back, where little fingers could reach, but big hands couldn't," Grace continued. "She was thinking about me the whole time, even when she was so scared. The courtroom was dead silent. Even Marcus Webb had stopped his nervous fidgeting, staring at Grace with an expression of growing horror and disbelief. "Grace," Rivera said gently, "did your mommy tell you anything else about that night?" "She fought really, really hard," Grace said, her small voice carrying across the hushed room. "She didn't want the scary man to find me. When he grabbed her, she grabbed him back and tore his shirt. A blue button came off and rolled under the refrigerator." Defense attorney Linda Hayes shot to her feet, her voice strained with desperation. "Your Honor, this is beyond the bounds of any reasonable legal proceeding. This child is clearly recounting dreams or fantasies." "Mommy says the lady with glasses is scared too," Grace interrupted, looking directly at Hayes with those penetrating blue eyes. "She says being scared makes people say things that aren't true." Judge Morrison studied the child carefully. In her decades on the bench, she had developed an ability to distinguish between truth and fabrication, and everything about Grace's demeanor suggested genuine belief in what she was saying. "Mr. Rivera," the judge said slowly, "are you requesting that we investigate the child's claims?" "Your Honor, the locations Miss Grace has described are specific enough to warrant examination. If physical evidence exists where she indicates—" "This is preposterous," Hayes exploded. "Evidence discovered through alleged supernatural communication cannot be admissible in any court of law." Grace's clear voice cut through the legal argument. "Mommy says the truth is the truth, no matter how people find it. She says hiding from the truth just makes everyone hurt more." Detective Chen stood up, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement. "Your Honor, I request permission to examine the locations the child has described. If evidence exists, we need to find it." Judge Morrison felt the weight of legal precedent warring with the pursuit of justice. "Detective Chen, how quickly could you organize a search?" "Within the hour, Your Honor. The Miller house has remained sealed as a crime scene." Marcus Webb had gone ashen, his breathing becoming increasingly labored. His attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear, but he seemed unable to focus on her words. "The child's knowledge of specific details not released to the public is compelling," Judge Morrison admitted. "I'm going to authorize a limited search of the locations described. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning to allow—" Empty chair, and nodded as if receiving approval. "Mommy says thank you for believing us. She says finding her hiding places will help everyone understand what really happened." As the courtroom began to empty, Eleanor approached her granddaughter with tears streaming down her face. "Sweetheart, how do you know about Mommy's hiding places?" Grace reached out and took her grandmother's hand with surprising strength. "She shows me things, Grandma Ellie. She shows me pictures in my mind of what happened. She wants everyone to know she tried so hard to protect me. Even at the end." The simple acceptance in Grace's voice, her calm acknowledgement of her mother's death, and her role in seeking justice, was perhaps the most heartbreaking thing anyone in the courtroom had witnessed. Detective Chen approached them, her professional composure struggling against her emotional response to the child's testimony. "Grace, you've been very brave today. If what you're telling us is true, you might help us find very important evidence." "It's true," Grace said with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "Mommy doesn't mind, and neither do I." The Miller house stood exactly as it had been left 6 months ago, wrapped in police tape and bearing the invisible weight of tragedy. Detective Chen led the small procession up the front walk. her heart hammering with anticipation and dread. Behind her walked Grace and Eleanor, followed by 2 crime scene technicians and a police photographer. Prosecutor Rivera had insisted on witnessing the search personally, while defense attorney Hayes trailed reluctantly behind, her legal objections overruled, but not silenced. Grace showed no signs of trauma or hesitation as they approached her former home. Instead, she walked with purpose, her small hand clasped firmly in Eleanor's, her blue eyes bright with determination. "The kitchen's this way," Grace announced, leading them through the front door as if she were giving a tour rather than revisiting the scene of her mother's murder. "Mommy says she's glad people are finally going to understand." The house felt heavy with memory and loss. Crime scene tape still marked the living room where Jennifer Miller's body had been found. But Grace walked past it without a glance, focused entirely on her mission. In the kitchen, she stopped directly in front of the heating vent near the window, a metal grate set into the wall about 3 feet from the floor. Detective Chen had examined this room thoroughly during the initial investigation, but the vent had seemed too high and too small to be relevant. "Right there," Grace said, pointing with absolute confidence. "Mommy pushed my necklace as Original investigation. "Someone's been here," she murmured, her trained eye now catching details that had been overlooked. "Recent disturbance to the paint." The crime scene technician produced a screwdriver and carefully removed the vent cover. Chin pulled out her flashlight and peered into the darkness of the ductwork. "I see something," she breathed. Using a pair of long tweezers, Chen carefully extracted a small object from deep within the vent. As it emerged into the light, Eleanor gasped and pressed her hand to her heart. It was Grace's locket, the tiny gold heart necklace that had been missing since the night of the murder. But it wasn't alone. Wrapped around the chain was a piece of torn blue fabric, and nestled beside it was a distinctive navy button. "Dear God," Rivera whispered. "It's exactly where she said it would be." Grace clapped her hands together with pure joy. "Mommy did it. She hid my treasure where the scary man couldn't find it." She looked toward empty space beside her grandmother, her face radiant with pride. "I knew you were the bravest mommy in the whole world." Chen held the evidence up to the light, her professional amazement warring with her emotional response to Grace's obvious delight. The fabric was clearly torn from a larger piece, with threads still attached. The button was masculine, flat, dark blue, with a distinctive anchor design. "This button," Rivera said, studying it closely. "It matches the description of buttons from the shirt Marcus Webb was wearing when arrested, the shirt that was missing one button from the front." Defense attorney Hayes had gone pale. "This proves nothing. Evidence could have been planted." "By whom?" Chen demanded. "The house has been sealed for 6 months. The only people with access have been law enforcement, and the hiding place was so obscure that even we missed it." Grace had approached the crime scene photographer, who was documenting the discovery. "Can you take a picture of my necklace?" she asked politely. "I want to remember how brave Mommy was." The photographer, a veteran of hundreds of crime scenes, found his hands shaking slightly as he focused his camera. "Of course, sweetheart." Eleanor knelt beside her granddaughter, tears streaming down her face as she held the recovered locket. "Oh, Grace, your mommy loved you so much." "I know," Grace replied simply. "She still does. Love doesn't stop just because someone goes to heaven." It just changes how it helps. Chen was examining the torn fabric under her magnifying glass. There are what appear to be skin cells caught in the tear, she reported, and possibly blood. Impossible to ignore. Rivera felt his worldview shifting with each piece of evidence that perfectly matched the child's supernatural revelations. "There's more," Grace announced, looking toward her invisible mother again. "Mommy says there's something else hidden, but not in the house." Hayes found her voice again. "Your Honor, Mr. Rivera, this has gone far enough. You cannot base a criminal investigation on a child's fantasies." "They're not fantasies," Grace protested, with the indignation of a child whose truth is being questioned. "Mommy shows me real things that really happened. She wants everyone to know what the scary man did so he can't hurt other people." Detective Chen was already sealing the evidence in proper containers, her mind racing with the implications. Physical evidence that corroborated every detail of Grace's testimony, found in a location so obscure that only someone present during the crime could have known about it. "Grace," Rivera said gently, "you mentioned there's something else hidden?" Grace nodded solemnly, her small hand reaching out to touch the empty air beside her. "Mommy says she hid something outside, too, in case the scary man found the first hiding place. Something that would prove he was there." The weight of this revelation settled over everyone present. If Jennifer Miller had managed to hide additional evidence, she was so smart, Grace continued, her voice filled with pride and sadness. Even when she was scared, she was thinking about how to catch the bad guy. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Miller family's backyard as the search team gathered around Grace, who stood beside the small garden shed with the confidence of someone following precise directions. Eleanor watched her granddaughter with a mixture of amazement and heartbreak, still struggling to accept that her quiet, traumatized little girl had somehow become the key to solving her daughter's murder. "Mommy says she came out here when she heard the breaking glass," Grace explained, her small voice carrying clearly in the quiet suburban setting. "She thought maybe she could hide from the scary man, but she was really smart and hid something important first." Detective Chen approached the weathered wooden shed cautiously. During the original investigation, they had searched the building but found nothing significant. Just garden tools, lawn equipment, and the accumulated debris of suburban life. "Where exactly did your mommy hide something, sweetheart?" Grace walked to the far corner of the shed, behind an old lawnmower that would have concealed anyone crouching there. She pointed to a loose board near the floor. "Under there." She pushed it way underneath where the scary man couldn't see even if he looked. Chen knelt and examined the board Grace indicated. "Lawnmower," Chen called to the crime scene technician. As they shifted the heavy equipment, Grace continued her narration with the matter-of-fact tone that had characterized her entire testimony. "Mommy says she grabbed the scary man's phone when they were fighting. He dropped it and didn't notice because he was being mean to her." Rivera felt his pulse quicken. "She took his phone?" "Not took," Grace corrected with childish precision. "She grabbed it when he wasn't looking and threw it really hard so it would be safe. She wanted the police to find it and see what kind of person he really was." Chen had pried up the loose board and was shining her flashlight into the dark space beneath the shed's floor. "There's definitely something here," she announced, her voice tight with excitement and apprehension. Using her extended tweezers, she carefully extracted a cell phone, older model, cracked screen, but potentially still containing recoverable data. But as it emerged into the daylight, Everyone could see that it wasn't just damaged from being thrown. There were clear bloodstains on the case, and what appeared to be strands of blonde hair caught in the protective cover. "Jennifer's hair," Eleanor whispered, recognizing the distinctive color and texture immediately. Grace nodded sadly. Mommy's hair got caught when the scary man grabbed her, but she was fighting back really hard. She wanted to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else. Chen was examining the phone with growing excitement. Despite the damage, the device appeared to be intact enough for data recovery. If this phone belongs to Marcus Webb, and if it contains any video or photo evidence, it does, Grace said with absolute certainty. "Mommy says the scary man took pictures of our house before he came inside. He wanted to know where all the doors and windows were." The implication sent chills through everyone present. Premeditation, planning, stalking behavior, all elements that would elevate the charges significantly. But Grace wasn't finished. "And Mommy says he was taking a video when he came inside because he wanted to remember where he looked for things. But he forgot he was recording when—" Her small voice trailed off, the weight of what she was describing finally seeming to affect her. Rivera knelt beside her, his voice gentle. "It's okay, Grace. You don't have to say anything that makes you too sad." Grace looked toward the empty space where she claimed her mother stood, seemed to receive some form of encouragement, then continued. "The phone was still recording when he hurt Mommy. She made sure it kept recording because she wanted people to see his face." Chen was already contacting the FBI's technical unit. "If there's video evidence on this device showing the perpetrator's face during the commission of the crime." Defense Attorney Hayes, who had been growing increasingly pale throughout the afternoon's discoveries, made one last desperate attempt. "None of this evidence can be admissible. It was discovered through supernatural claims that have no basis in legal precedent." Grace looked at Hayes with the kind of patience adults usually reserve for other adults who weren't understanding something simple. "The evidence is real," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter how people find real things. What matters is that they're true." Judge Morrison, who had arrived to witness the second search, studied the recovered phone with the expression of someone watching legal history being written. "Ms. Hayes, while the method of discovery is unprecedented, the physical evidence itself appears genuine. If laboratory analysis confirms the blood evidence, and if the phone contains video documentation," Marcus Webb's attorney felt her carefully constructed defense crumbling. Everything her client had told her about the night of the murder was being systematically contradicted by evidence that seemed to have been guided to discovery by the victim herself. Grace had wandered back toward the house, but she wasn't finished speaking to her invisible mother. The adults watched in fascination as she carried on an animated conversation with empty air, nodding and shaking her head, as if receiving detailed instructions. "Mommy wants everyone to know she's not angry," Grace announced, turning back to the group. "She says being angry takes too much energy, and she needs her energy to help catch the scary man." She paused, listening again. Then her expression grew more serious. "She also says the scary man is getting sicker in his heart because he's keeping the secret. She says secrets are like poison. They make people do worse and worse things if they don't get them out." Detective Chen felt a chill at the child's words. In her experience, criminals who successfully evaded justice for one crime often escalated to more serious offenses. If Marcus Webb was indeed guilty and remained free, "Mommy says he's already thinking about hurting other people," Grace continued with the devastating honesty of childhood. "She says that's why it's so important to tell the truth now, before the poison makes him hurt another family like ours." The weight of responsibility settled heavily on everyone present. This wasn't just about justice for Jennifer Miller anymore. It was about preventing future tragedies. As the evidence was carefully catalogued and prepared for laboratory analysis, Grace took her grandmother's hand and looked back toward the house, where she had once lived in safety and happiness. "Can we go see Mommy's chair now?" she asked. "She wants to go back to the courtroom and watch the scary man tell the truth tomorrow." Eleanor squeezed her granddaughter's hand, finally beginning to accept that whatever force was guiding Grace's revelations, it was serving the cause of justice. "Yes, sweetheart. Let's go," she said softly. "Mommy says we don't need to be sad about you anymore. We have all our treasures now. And the scary man can't hide from the truth." The evidence recovered from Grace's supernatural guidance was already being rushed to laboratories for analysis, but everyone involved sensed that the physical proof would only confirm what the child's impossible knowledge had already revealed. Jennifer Miller had fought back against her killer with intelligence and determination, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ensure justice prevailed even from beyond the grave. Detective Sarah Chen had worked with many canine partners over her 15-year career, but Bella was exceptional. From the moment they first met at the police training facility 4 years ago, the German Shepherd had been bred from a line of working dogs renowned for their intelligence and sensitivity. But what set Bella apart wasn't just her nose for narcotics or her ability to track suspects, it was her uncanny ability to read human emotions with almost supernatural accuracy. The training facility's chief instructor, Captain Martinez, had warned Chen about Bella's unique characteristics. "She's the smartest dog we've ever worked with," he had explained. "But she's also the most emotionally sensitive. She picks up on things other dogs miss: stress levels, fear, guilt, even grief. Some handlers find it unsettling." Chen had found it fascinating. During their initial bonding period, Bella had demonstrated an ability to anticipate Chen's reactions before Chen herself was aware of them. The dog would position herself protectively when Chen encountered aggressive suspects, would offer comfort during difficult cases involving children, and would alert to potential dangers with a reliability that defied explanation. Dogs process scent molecules at concentrations we can't even measure. Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the department's consulting animal behaviorist, had explained to Chen during one of their training sessions. But Bella seems to be picking up on more than just chemical signatures. She's reading electromagnetic fields, stress hormones, even what some researchers call emotional residue, the lingering energy patterns that intense emotions leave in physical spaces. The science fascinated Chen, but the practical application was what mattered. Bella had helped solve dozens of cases by detecting evidence other investigators missed, by alerting to hidden drugs or weapons, and by identifying suspects through behavioral cues invisible to human observers. But nothing in Bella had moved through the house as if following invisible pathways, her head turning to track something no one else could see. She kept looking up, Chen remembered, reviewing her notes from that night. not at ceiling fixtures or potential hiding spots, but as if she was watching someone moving through the rooms at human height. In Grace's bedroom, Bella's behavior had become even more unusual. She had positioned herself protectively in front of the closet, where they eventually found the traumatized child. But her attention had been divided, part of her focus on Grace, part on something else entirely. It was like she was standing guard over two beings instead of one, Chen had written in her report. Professional instinct kept me from including my more unusual observations. But Bella was clearly perceiving something beyond normal sensory input. Now, watching Grace and Bella interact in the courtroom, Chen was beginning to understand what her partner had been sensing that night. The connection between child and dog was immediate and profound, as if they recognized each other as fellow witnesses to something extraordinary. Grace approached Bella with the fearless confidence of someone who understood that the dog was an ally, not a threat. When she placed her small hand on Bella's head and whispered, "I know you see her too," Bella's entire demeanor shifted, from agitation to calm recognition. Dogs can perceive electromagnetic frequencies well beyond human range, Dr. Walsh had continued to explain during their training. They detect changes in atmospheric pressure, minute temperature variations, even electrical fields generated by strong emotions. If consciousness creates measurable energy patterns, and some quantum physicists believe it does, then a sensitive dog like Bella might actually be detecting the presence of something science doesn't yet fully understand. Chen had always been a practical, evidence-based investigator, but Bella had taught her to pay attention to information that couldn't be easily quantified. The dog's reactions had led to breakthrough discoveries in cases where conventional methods had failed. And now, watching Bella's focused attention on the empty jury chair, Chen was forced to consider possibilities that challenged everything she thought she knew about the nature of reality. "What do you see, girl?" Chen whispered to her partner during a quiet moment in the courtroom. "What are you trying to tell us?" Bella's amber eyes remained fixed on jury seat number 7, her body language speaking of respectful attention rather than distress. When Grace was speaking, Bella would occasionally turn her head as if following a conversation between two speakers, though only one voice was audible to human ears. The scientific explanations felt inadequate in the face of what Chen was witnessing. Electromagnetic fields and emotional responses suggested something more complex, as if the dog was genuinely interacting with a conscious presence, invisible to everyone else. Grace seemed to understand Bella's unique perception intuitively. "She's a special doggy," Grace had told Chen matter-of-factly. "She can see things that make some people scared. But she's not scared because she knows the difference between good spirits and bad ones." The child's casual reference to spirits, plural, suggested that this wasn't an isolated incident for either Grace or Bella. They were both accustomed to perceiving layers of reality invisible to most humans. Chen found herself reconsidering every case she and Bella had worked together, wondering how many times her partner's exceptional instincts had been detecting more than just physical evidence. The drug busts, where Bella had alerted to locations that tested negative, but where dealers were later arrested. The missing person cases, where Bella had led them to areas that seemed irrelevant, until crucial clues were discovered days later. "You've been seeing things all along, haven't you?" Chen murmured to Bella during another quiet moment. "You've been trying to tell us about the invisible connections that link crimes to consequences, victims to justice. Bella's tail wagged once, a subtle acknowledgement that seemed to confirm Chen's growing understanding. The bond between human and canine partners had always been strong in canine units, built on mutual trust and shared purpose. But watching Bella interact with Grace, Chen realized that some dogs, particularly those with exceptional sensitivity, might be bridges between the physical world and dimensions of existence that science was only beginning to explore. Whatever the explanation for Bella's behavior, one thing was certain: the dog's instincts had never led them astray. If Bella believed that Jennifer Miller's presence was somehow guiding this investigation toward justice, then Chen was prepared to trust her partner's perception, regardless of how it challenged her understanding of what was possible. As the days of testimony progressed, Detective Chen observed a remarkable transformation in Bella's behavior. The German Shepherd's initial agitation at the empty jury chair had evolved into something far more complex, a protective vigilance that encompassed both Grace Miller and the invisible presence the child claimed to see. During court sessions, Bella positioned herself with tactical precision that impressed even seasoned law enforcement officers. She would lie at an angle that allowed her to monitor Grace in the witness area, maintain visual contact with the empty chair, and keep Marcus Webb within her periphery. Language suggests she's also protecting something or someone in that empty chair. The way she angles her head, the subtle shifts in her attention, it's as if she's responding to a physical presence that requires safeguarding. The court officials had initially been skeptical about allowing a police dog to remain in the courtroom during such sensitive proceedings. Bailiff Tom Anderson had expressed concerns about distraction and disruption, but Judge Morrison had been swayed by Bella's remarkable composure and the obvious comfort her presence provided to Grace. "That dog is better behaved than half the attorneys I've seen in this courtroom," Judge Morrison had remarked privately to her clerk. "And if her presence helps the child testify more effectively, then she stays." What surprised everyone was how Bella's protective behavior extended beyond Grace to include the empty space where the child claimed her mother sat. When court was in session, Bella would occasionally shift her position to create a protective triangle, herself at one point, Grace at another, and the empty chair at the third. To observers, it appeared as though the dog was consciously including an invisible third party in her protection protocol. Marcus Webb's reaction to Bella's constant surveillance was becoming increasingly problematic for his defense. The man who had maintained his innocence for months was showing obvious signs of stress whenever the dog's intelligent eyes fixed on him. His hands would begin to shake, his breathing would become rapid, and he would unconsciously touch his left hand, the same hand Grace had mentioned in her supernatural testimony about her mother's final struggle. Defense attorney Linda Hayes had requested multiple times that Bella be removed from the courtroom, arguing that the dog's presence was prejudicial to her client. "Your Honor, my client has a documented fear of large dogs stemming from a childhood incident," she had argued. "The animal's constant staring is causing him significant distress and interfering with his ability to participate in his own defense." But Prosecutor Rivera had countered with expert testimony about Bella's exceptional training record and her value as an investigative asset. More importantly, Grace's comfort level seemed directly tied to Bella's presence. When the dog was in the courtroom, Grace spoke clearly and confidently. During the brief period when Bella had been removed for a judicial conference, Grace had become withdrawn and anxious. "The child's testimony is crucial to this case," Rivera had argued. If the presence of a trained police dog helps her provide accurate testimony about the murder of her mother, then any discomfort to the defendant is secondary to the pursuit of justice. The most remarkable aspect of the human-dog dynamic was Grace's obvious ability to communicate with Bella in ways that transcended normal pet-owner interaction. During breaks in testimony, observers watched in fascination as Grace would whisper to Bella, and the dog would respond with specific behaviors, turning to look at the empty chair, moving to a particular position in the courtroom, or focusing her attention on Marcus Webb with laser-like intensity. "Mummy says you're doing a very good job," Grace told Bella during one recess, her small hands stroking the dog's fur. "She says you're the best police doggy in the whole world, because you can see the truth, even when people try to hide it." Bella's tail wagged at Grace's words, but more significantly, the dog turned to look directly at the empty chair, as if acknowledging praise from the invisible presence. Chen found herself studying this interaction with professional fascination. "It's not just one-way communication," she noted. "Grace isn't just projecting onto Bella. The dog is genuinely responding to information that seems to come from external sources." Dr. Rebecca Walsh, the animal behaviorist, had been called to observe Bella's courtroom behavior and provide expert analysis. Her report was carefully worded, but contained observations that challenged conventional understanding of canine behavior. "The subject animal demonstrates response patterns consistent with multi-entity environmental awareness," Walsh had written. "While I cannot confirm the presence of supernatural elements, the dog's behavior suggests she is responding to stimuli beyond normal human perception. Her protective positioning includes spatial considerations for what appears to be a third party, unknown to standard observational methods." The partnership between Grace, Bella, and the alleged spirit of Jennifer Miller was creating an atmosphere in the courtroom that affected everyone present. Jurors found themselves glancing repeatedly at the empty chair. Court personnel spoke in hushed tones about unusual cold spots and inexplicable sounds, and even hardened legal professionals admitted to feeling watched by unseen eyes. Marcus Webb's deteriorating mental state was becoming increasingly obvious. He would flinch when Bella looked at him, break into visible sweats when Grace spoke about her mother's messages, and show signs of severe anxiety whenever the child and dog seemed to be communicating about information he recognized as accurate. The defendant's reaction to the child and dog working together is perhaps the most compelling evidence we have, Rivera noted to his team. "Innocent people don't show terror when confronted by a 5-year-old and a police dog. But guilty people who believe they're being exposed by supernatural forces, that's a different story." The unusual alliance between the living child, the trained police dog, and the alleged spirit of the murder victim was transforming the entire legal proceeding into something unprecedented in American jurisprudence. Whether one believed in supernatural communication or not, the practical effect was undeniable. Truth was emerging through channels that defied explanation, and justice was being served by a team that bridged the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. The confrontation occurred during the lunch recess on the 4th day of testimony. Marcus Webb, who had been growing increasingly agitated as evidence mounted against him, made the mistake of approaching Grace Miller while she sat quietly in the hallway with her grandmother Eleanor. Bella, who had been resting peacefully at Detective Chen's side, immediately went on high alert. Her ears snapped forward, her body tensed into a protective crouch, and a low growl began building in her throat as Webb approached the child. Grace, however, showed no fear. She looked up at the man who had murdered her mother with the same direct, innocent gaze she had maintained throughout the trial proceedings. "Hello," she said politely, as if greeting any adult. "Are you feeling better today?" Webb stopped in his tracks, confusion clouding his features. Better? What do you mean? Mommy says you've been having bad dreams, Grace replied with the matter-of-fact tone she used for all her supernatural revelations. She says that's what happens when people keep scary secrets. The secrets make bad dreams so the truth can try to get out. Bella's growl intensified, and Detective Chen moved closer, her hand instinctively moving to her service weapon. But Grace held up one small hand in a gesture that was becoming familiar to everyone who worked with her. "It's okay, Bella," Grace said softly to the dog. "He's scared, but he's not going to hurt anybody else. Mommy says the scared feeling is eating up all his mean feelings." Webb stared at the child as if she were speaking in tongues. The accuracy of her statement about his nightmares, the terrible dreams that had plagued him for months, featuring Jennifer Miller's face and Grace's terrified eyes, sent ice through his veins. "How could you possibly know about—" he began, then stopped himself. Grace tilted her head, studying him with those penetrating blue eyes. "Mommy shows me things sometimes. She shows me how you can't sleep at night, and how you keep touching your hand where she scratched you, and how you jump when you hear little girls laughing, because it reminds you of me." Each observation hit Webb like a physical blow. The insomnia, the unconscious touching of the scar on his left hand, the way children's laughter had begun to trigger panic attacks. These were private torments he had shared with no one. "She says you whistle sad songs now instead of nervous ones," Grace continued, her voice gentle with childlike compassion. "She says you're not really a mean person, just a scared person who made a very bad choice." Webb's legs felt weak. He leaned against the hallway wall, his breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "You're just a little kid. You can't know these things." Grace looked toward empty space beside her grandmother, as if consulting with an invisible advisor. "Mommy says you should say sorry. She says sorry is the first step to making the scared feelings go away." The simple suggestion, delivered with such innocent sincerity, broke something inside Marcus Webb. For months he had been carrying the weight of what he had done, the guilt eating away at him like acid. He had told himself it was self-defense, that Jennifer Miller had attacked him first, that he'd had no choice. But looking into Grace's eyes so much like her mother's, those lies crumbled away. I can't," he stammered. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Mommy says you can," Grace replied gently. "She says you're not too broken to fix. She says even people who do very bad things can become good again if they're brave enough to tell the truth." Bella had risen to her feet, but her growling had stopped. The dog seemed to sense that despite Webb's obvious distress, he posed no immediate physical threat. Instead, she positioned herself between Grace and Webb, but her stance was protective rather than aggressive. Defense attorney Linda Hayes appeared at the end of the hallway, her face pale with panic as she realized her client was having an unsupervised conversation with the prosecution's key witness. "Marcus, step away from the child immediately," she called out, her voice sharp with legal urgency. But Webb seemed unable to move, transfixed by Grace's unwavering gaze and her impossible knowledge of his private guilt. "Your mommy," he said hoarsely. Does she hate me?" Grace considered this question with the seriousness she brought to all inquiries about her mother's feelings. "Mommy says hate is too heavy to carry in heaven. She says she's sad about what happened, but she's not angry anymore. She's just tired of watching you hurt yourself with the secret." Eleanor Miller, who had been listening to this exchange with growing amazement and grief, found her voice. "Grace, sweetheart, you don't have to talk to this man." "It's okay, Grandma Ellie," Grace replied, her attention still focused on Webb. "Mommy says he needs to hear that someone forgives him, before he can forgive himself. The words hit Webb like lightning. Forgiveness, a concept he had never dared consider, coming from the daughter of the woman he had killed. The psychological impact was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Prosecutor Rivera appeared, drawn by the commotion, and immediately assessed the situation. Webb was clearly in emotional distress. Grace was calm, but engaged in conversation with the defendant, and Bella was maintaining protective watch without showing aggression. "Mr. Webb," Rivera said carefully, "perhaps you should speak with your attorney." But Webb's attention remained fixed on Grace. "If I
says the truth would help everyone feel better. You and me and Grandma Ellie, and all the people who want to make sure bad things don't happen to other families." The hallway had fallen completely silent. Court personnel, journalists, and spectators who had witnessed this exchange understood they were seeing something unprecedented. A murder victim's daughter offering forgiveness to her mother's killer, guided by what she claimed was her mother's spirit. Webb's composure finally cracked completely. Tears began streaming down his face as months of suppressed guilt and terror came pouring out. "I never meant for it to happen," he whispered. "I was just supposed to take some papers, but she fought back, and I got scared, and—" "That's enough, Marcus," Hayes interrupted sharply, finally reaching her client and grabbing his arm. "You're not saying another word without legal counsel present." But the damage was done, or perhaps, from the perspective of justice, the healing had begun. Webb's partial admission in front of multiple witnesses, prompted by a 5-year-old's offer of supernatural forgiveness, had changed the entire dynamic of the case. As Hayes pulled her client away toward the consultation room, Grace called after him softly. "Mommy says thank you for starting to tell the truth. She says the rest will be easier now." Webb looked back over his shoulder, his eyes meeting Grace's one final time. For a moment, the terror and guilt in his expression was replaced by something that might have been gratitude. Bella wagged her tail once, as if approving of the progress made, then settled back into her protective position beside Grace. The dog's instincts had been proven correct once again. She had recognized that this confrontation would lead not to violence, but to the breakthrough everyone had been hoping for. Marcus Webb sat in a cramped courthouse consultation room, hands trembling around lukewarm coffee. The fluorescent lighting deepened the shadows under his eyes. 20 pounds lost since trial, his face bore the strain of guilt and something stranger, terror. Defense attorney Linda Hayes, 23 years in criminal law, had seen killers and rapists, but never a client unraveled this fast. "The evidence is impossible," Marcus rasped. "That child, she knows things no one could know. Things I never told anyone." "You mean Grace Miller," Hayes said carefully. Marcus flinched at the name. "She described my whistling habit, the scar on my palm, hidden, never photographed. She said her mother told her about the half-moon mark where she scratched me." Hayes's legal mind faltered. Grace's testimony was frighteningly specific. 3 weeks earlier. Marcus remembered the night Jennifer Miller died. Hired to steal files for a custody case, he'd been told the house would be empty. But Jennifer was in the kitchen. She confronted him, refusing to reveal the file's location. The confrontation turned violent. Panic. Marcus struck her with a baseball bat. Twice, until she fell silent. Then a child's whimper from down the hall. He searched but couldn't find Grace, who hid as her mother had taught her. Sirens approached. Before fleeing, Marcus felt unseen eyes on him. "I'm sorry about your mommy," he whispered into the empty air. Present day. In his apartment, cluttered with liquor bottles and trial clippings, Marcus obsessed over Grace's courtroom words, phrases only Jennifer could have spoken that night. If the girl's knowledge came from her mother's spirit, then Marcus wasn't just guilty, he was haunted. "She looks like her," he murmured at a photo. "Same eyes, same determination." A text from Hayes urged him to consider a plea, but in the stillness, Marcus spoke to the air. "If you're here, Jennifer, I think about what I did every moment. Your daughter says you want me to tell the truth, but how can I ask forgiveness?" The room felt colder. He imagined Jennifer listening. Grace's forgiveness had cracked something in him. Maybe Jennifer's could follow. Looking at the crescent scar on his palm, he realized it was left deliberately, to mark him for justice. The next morning the courtroom buzzed as Grace returned to the stand. Bella, the police dog, lay at her side, eyes fixed on an empty jury chair Grace claimed her mother occupied. Prosecutor Rivera asked gently, "Grace, is there anything else your mommy wants the court to know?" "She says she's not angry with the scary man anymore. She fought to leave clues so the police could find the truth. She scratched him so her DNA would be there." Gasps rippled through the room. Grace pointed to her own palm. "The mark looks like a half moon. It's right here." All eyes turned to Marcus, who instinctively covered his left hand. "It burns sometimes," Grace added, "to remind him to tell the truth." Marcus shot to his feet, voice cracking. How could she know that? No one knows about the burning. He held up the scar for all to see. "Look, Jennifer left this mark. How else could she know?" Grace met his eyes. "Mommy says you don't have to be scared anymore." Showing the mark was brave. Tears streamed down Marcus's face. "She's here, isn't she? Jennifer Miller is sitting right there." Hayes called for a recess, but Marcus was locked on Grace. "Tell your mommy I'm sorry. I was only supposed to take papers, but I got scared." "She knows," Grace said softly. "She's been waiting for you to say it. Sorry is the first step to healing." In that moment, Marcus's resistance collapsed. The law might have struggled to break him, but the bond between mother and daughter, reaching across death, had succeeded. For the first time since that night, Marcus felt the faint possibility of peace. Rabbit, beside her grandmother Eleanor, with Bella stationed between them and the empty jury chair. Marcus Webb's breakdown the day before had forced recess, but Eleanor called Prosecutor Rivera overnight. Grace claimed her mother had more evidence. "Your Honor," Rivera began, "the witness says additional physical evidence exists at a location not searched by law enforcement." Judge Morrison addressed Grace directly. "What does your mommy want us to know?" Grace fixed her gaze on the empty chair. "Mommy says she hid something really important in the park before the scary man's helpers can make it disappear." The courtroom went still. Detective Chen asked, "Which park?" "Riverside Park," Grace replied. "By the big oak tree with the heart carved. JM plus GM forever." Eleanor gasped. Jennifer had carved it when Grace was 3. "What did she hide?" Rivera pressed. "Her purse, with a secret pocket. She buried it under the roots away from the playground," Grace said. "The day before the scary man came, she saw a blue car watching our house." Webb's face drained of color. Defense attorney Hayes objected to treasure hunts based on supernatural claims, but the judge, recalling Grace's past accuracy, ordered a search. 2 hours later, Chen, Bella, Rivera, Eleanor, Grace, and technicians stood at the oak. The carved heart was still there. Grace pointed to disturbed soil among the roots. Minutes into digging, Chen's probe struck something, a purse, sealed in plastic and wrapped for protection. Eleanor identified it immediately. Inside, wallet, keys, documents, photographs, and a brown leather wallet with a torn corner. "That's not Mommy's," Grace said. "She grabbed it when the scary man hurt her." If true, Jennifer had ripped Webb's wallet away mid-struggle and hidden it, preserving direct identification evidence. Rivera's case had just shifted from strong to irrefutable. The FBI processed the find. Dr. Patricia Vance reported the preservation was excellent. DNA, fingerprints, fibers intact. The wallet contained Webb's ID, credit cards, and blood matching Jennifer, plus skin cells matching Webb. Hayes asked about contamination. Dr. Vance said burial conditions confirmed 6 months underground, no signs of planting. The torn corner indicated violent removal. Defensive wound patterns on the wallet matched Jennifer's injuries. The evidence confirmed Grace's story. Jennifer had anticipated danger, hidden proof, and fought to leave forensic markers, down to the crescent scar she'd left on Webb's palm. Bella's scent recognition at the dig site further tied the purse to the crime scene. The thoroughness is unprecedented, Dr. Vance concluded. Grace, serene, said, "Mommy's proud of everyone for finding her clues." Eleanor whispered to Chen, "She's so much like Jennifer, always thinking ahead." By now, Webb's guilt wasn't discovered through the impossible knowledge of a 5-year-old. That night, Hayes sat in her office, drowning in case files. The supernatural origin of the leads defied every legal principle she knew, but the evidence itself was solid. She began drafting a motion to dismiss based on supernatural evidence discovery, knowing it was absurd and futile. Marcus texted, "Need to talk. Important decision to make." At the jail, he told her, "I need to know about plea options." She tried to argue for appeals based on the supernatural angle, but he cut her off. "That little girl knows things no one could know unless her mother's talking to her. Every detail she gives is exactly right. How long can I pretend? I've been carrying this for 6 months. Maybe it's time to stop running." "What does Grace want?" he asked. "She's offered forgiveness," Hayes said. "She says her mother wants you to tell the truth so everyone can feel better." "Then maybe this isn't about revenge," Marcus murmured. "Maybe it's about redemption." Monday morning, Hayes argued her motion. "Your Honor, this sets a dangerous precedent, convicting based on evidence found through conversations with the dead." Judge Morrison replied, "The evidence meets all standards of admissibility. The court cannot dismiss real, relevant evidence simply because its discovery was unusual." Rivera added, "The physical evidence stands on its own merits." From the gallery, Grace's small voice broke in. "Why won't the scary man say he's sorry? Mommy says it won't make the hurt go away, but it helps everyone start to feel better." All eyes turned to Webb. "She says the scary man is hurting himself more than anyone else by keeping the secret," Grace continued. Webb stood. "Your Honor, I want to change my plea." Hayes grabbed his arm. "Marcus, don't." "No," he said. "Grace is right. It's time to tell the truth." He turned to her. "Tell your mommy I'm ready to say I'm sorry. I'm ready to tell everyone what happened." Grace looked to the empty chair, nodded, then smiled. "Mommy says she's been waiting for you to be brave. Sorry is the first step to healing everyone's heart." The supernatural prosecution had done what human law alone could not, secured a confession through the forgiveness of a child and the presence she claimed stood beside her. The morning sun streamed through the courthouse windows as 5-year-old Grace Miller took the stand for what everyone sensed would be her final testimony. The packed courtroom held its breath. Days of supernatural revelations had led to this moment. Grace settled into the witness chair, her stuffed rabbit in her arms. Bella, the German shepherd, lay calmly nearby, alert but peaceful, as if she knew resolution was close. To know. Grace looked toward jury seat number 7, tilting her head as if listening to someone unseen. "Mommy says she's not angry anymore. Not even at the scary man who hurt her.
Anger takes too much energy, energy she needs to help people heal. The room was silent. Jurors leaned forward. Spectators dabbed their eyes. She says anger is like carrying heavy rocks in your backpack. The longer you carry them, the more tired you get. She forgives the scary man, but that doesn't mean what he did was okay. It means she won't let it make her heart sick anymore. Grace looked straight at Marcus Webb. His face was frozen in a mix of fear and awe. She wants peace, for me, for Grandma Ellie, for the scary man, for everyone. She says he's sick in his heart from carrying too many rocks, and telling the truth will help put them down. Rivera asked, does she want him to do something? She wants him to be brave and tell what really happened. Lying makes the sickness worse. Telling the truth starts to make it better. Marcus dropped his face into his hands, his shoulders shaking. Grace's voice softened. Mommy says he doesn't have to be scared anymore. Telling the truth is scary at first, but then the scared feeling goes away forever. The jury struggled to reconcile the supernatural with the undeniable emotional truth. If he tells the truth, Grace said, Mommy can forgive him all the way. Maybe he can forgive himself too. Marcus trembled. Your Honor, he said suddenly, standing, I need to tell everyone what really happened. His attorney grabbed his arm. Marcus, don't. Yes, I do, he said. I can't carry these heavy rocks anymore. Judge Morrison asked, Are you requesting to take the stand? Yes, Your Honor. I need to tell the truth about Jennifer Miller. Whispers filled the room. He walked forward like a man resigned, but relieved. Facing Grace, tears on his face, Marcus said, I was the scary man who came to your house that night. Eleanor Miller gasped. Grace simply nodded. I was hired to steal papers from your mommy's files. A man in a custody battle thought she had evidence against him. He offered me $5,000. I was supposed to wait until she was at work, but she was home. I panicked when she confronted me with a bat. She told me to leave, that she'd call the police. He swallowed hard. She fought for you, Grace. She scratched me to leave evidence. I hit her with the bat. I didn't mean to kill her, but I did. Then, I heard you crying. I looked for you, terrified you'd tell the police. Thank God you were hiding. He admitted he never found the papers. Jennifer had died protecting. Telling the truth was very brave. The courtroom was silent. Bella suddenly rose, walked to the empty jury seat, and gave one decisive bark. Acknowledgement, not warning. Then lay down completely relaxed. Grace's smile widened. Mommy says thank you to everyone who found the truth, and thank you to the scary man for telling it. Eleanor knelt beside Grace. Is your mommy still here? Grace glanced at the seat. She says she's ready to go to heaven now. The truth came out, so she doesn't need to watch the trial anymore. The charged air around the chairs seemed to lighten. Detective Chen whispered to Rivera, I've never seen anything like this. Whether you believe in spirits or not, she gave us what no investigation could. Rivera nodded. The evidence is real. The confession is real. Whatever Grace was channeling, it served justice. Judge Morrison addressed the room. We've witnessed something extraordinary. Truth emerged through means our system doesn't typically recognize, but it was verified. Sometimes justice finds a way, and today truth spoke through an innocent child guided by forces beyond our understanding. Eleanor hugged Grace. "I can feel it," she whispered to Chen. "Like a storm has passed." "Mommy says the heavy rocks are gone," Grace told her. "Now everyone can start to feel better." Before leaving, Grace walked to Marcus. "Thank you for telling the truth. Mommy says you're not the scary man anymore, just a sad man who made a very bad mistake. Now you can get better." He knelt before her. "Thank you for helping me find the courage. I'll spend my life trying to be worthy of her forgiveness." As he was led away, Grace turned to the empty chair. "Bye-bye, Mommy. I love you more than all the stars in the sky." The trial of Marcus Webb ended not just with justice, but with healing, born from a mother's love, a daughter's innocence, and a truth that transcended death. The jury took only 27 minutes, the shortest deliberation in county history. When they returned, Foreman Robert Martinez stood, voice thick with emotion. "In the case of the people versus Marcus Webb, on the charge of murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." The words struck the courtroom like a bell. Webb, who had already confessed in heartbreaking detail, simply bowed his head. Guilty verdicts followed for breaking. Crime took the life of a social worker devoted to protecting children. Your actions orphaned a 5-year-old girl, but your confession, under extraordinary circumstances, shows that even terrible crimes can be met with redemption. She sentenced him to life without parole, recommending he be allowed to work in victim advocacy. Webb met Grace's gaze as the judge spoke, and she returned it with quiet compassion. Eleanor addressed the court. "Thank you to everyone who believed in my granddaughter when her story seemed impossible." Detective Chen reflected later to her captain, "Bella knew from the start. She sensed Jennifer's presence and helped lead us to evidence no normal investigation could have found." Grace's only comment after sentencing was simple. "Mommy can rest now. Everyone knows the truth." The case became a national phenomenon. News outlets debated the supernatural testimony. Some saw proof of life after death. Others framed it as extraordinary intuition. Eleanor declined book and movie offers but told reporters, "If sharing our story helps other families, maybe some good can come from this tragedy." Support poured in, letters from across the country, offers of therapy from child psychologist Dr. Sarah Williams, and recognition from law enforcement. Chen became Grace's fiercest advocate, crediting her for solving the case. Bella, now a minor celebrity, attracted interest from researchers studying her uncanny instincts. Grace adjusted well to life without her mother's spirit. "I don't see Mommy anymore," she told Dr. Williams, "but I can still feel her love. It's like sunshine. You can't see it, but it warms you." Donations created the Jennifer Miller Memorial Fund for Victims' Rights, offering legal advocacy and counseling to families of violent crime victims. At the inaugural ceremony, Grace spoke. "Scary things don't go away, but love makes them hurt less. If this money helps families feel more love, Mommy would be happy." Eleanor, once skeptical of Grace's gift, became an advocate for families experiencing the unexplained. "Love is stronger than death," she told a victims' rights conference. "My granddaughter taught me healing happens when we face the truth, no matter how impossible it seems. Local businesses supported the Millers with groceries, scholarships, and connections to children's grief programs. Grace began befriending other children who'd lost parents, offering gentle wisdom. Love doesn't go away when people die. It just changes how it helps us. 6 months later, Grace started first grade at Riverside Elementary. Her teacher, Mrs. Santos, was struck by her warmth and resilience. Within days, she was comforting a boy who
She's helped us solve cases we thought were impossible.
Bella's sensitivity to emotional distress became a valuable police tool. Eleanor balanced protecting Grace with letting her grow. Dr. Williams noted, "She understands what happened was special, but she isn't defined by it. She's just a little girl who happened to help solve a murder." The Miller case entered law school curricula, sparking debate on the role of unconventional evidence. Judge Morrison herself wrote that the law must remain open to truth, regardless of its source. At home, the Miller house became a safe space for families coping with grief. Grace, now a peer counselor in her own way, didn't try to erase sadness. She made space for it, showing that healing is possible. On Sundays, Eleanor and Grace visited Jennifer's grave. Grace no longer claimed to hear her, but their bond was evident in her calm smile. "I think Mommy's happy," she'd say, hand in Eleanor's. "I think she knows we're going to be okay." The healing Jennifer wanted had come, not through revenge, but through truth, forgiveness, and a love that time and death could not diminish. The Miller case sent shockwaves through law enforcement, forcing agencies to reconsider how they handled evidence that defied conventional explanation. Detective Sarah Chen became the nation's unofficial consultant for cases involving supernatural witness testimony, fielding calls from departments across the country. One such call came from Detective Maria Rodriguez in Phoenix. An 8-year-old girl claimed her missing father was calling to her from a specific desert location, giving detailed descriptions of landmarks and objects. Before the Miller case, this would have been dismissed as fantasy. Now, it demanded serious consideration. Patterns were emerging. In 17 cases Chen had consulted on, 12 saw breakthroughs after following children's supernatural leads. This success inspired the Riverside Police Department to create the Unexplained Evidence Protocol, with Chen leading the new unit and her canine partner, Bella, by her side. "Verification is key," Chen told fellow officers at a national conference. "We don't accept claims blindly, but we also don't dismiss them." The legal community was split. Some prosecutors embraced the new possibilities. Skeptics like defense attorney Michael Torres warned of the dangers. Harvard law professor James Kellerman argued for a new evidentiary framework, while Grace Miller, now 7, continued quietly aiding cases under her grandmother Eleanor's careful protection. Her most remarkable contribution came in the Richardson case in Oregon, where she helped another child, Tommy Richardson, share details that led to solving his father's murder. Dr. Williams, Grace's therapist, noted her gift for helping children access their own spiritual sensitivity. Bella's role evolved beyond typical canine duties. She could and even spiritual distress. Training programs across the country studied her methods, inspiring new approaches to service dog training. Captain Martinez, once skeptical, admitted Chen and Bella had solved more cold cases in a year than the Bureau had in 3. Universities began researching supernatural evidence. Courts started creating protocols for such testimony. Grace's influence extended into policy, changing how child witnesses were heard. Eleanor, once doubtful of spiritual phenomena, had grown to accept that healing could come from unexpected sources.
She learned to guard Grace's childhood while allowing her to help others. Grace herself gained control over her sensitivity, choosing when to open herself to communication, and when to just be a kid. She began visiting children's hospitals, offering quiet comfort without claiming to speak with the dead. Chen and Bella's partnership deepened, solving long, cold cases with Bella's uncanny instincts. Even Linda Hayes, Marcus Webb's former defense attorney, left criminal defense for victim advocacy, transformed by the case's supernatural elements. In prison, Marcus Webb began corresponding with Eleanor. Initially unwelcome, his letters revealed genuine remorse. Grace's forgiveness had saved him from suicide. Now he ran a support group for inmates seeking redemption. Grace's response was simple. That's what Mommy would want, for something good to come from all the sad things. The community embraced Grace, shielding her from exploitation and creating a safe space for her to grow. Teachers learned to nurture spiritually sensitive children. Neighbors treated her not as a novelty, but as a source of comfort and wisdom. Scientists also took interest. Dr. Rebecca Walsh studied Bella's brain scans, finding unusual activity linked to emotional processing. Grace participated in ethical, closely monitored research, balancing her cooperation with a normal school life. Harvard's Kellerman created the Miller Archive, a comprehensive record of the case for future study. Bella's influence birthed a new generation of therapy dogs, trained for heightened emotional sensitivity. While they lacked Bella's spiritual abilities, they excelled at comforting the grieving and traumatized. Researchers from neuroscience to quantum physics explored whether consciousness might persist after death. Children with claimed spiritual sensitivity showed unique brainwave patterns. Dogs like Bella exhibited hormonal changes in emotionally charged locations. Grace's own explanation remained disarmingly simple. I just opened my heart really wide and listened really carefully. This inspired therapeutic programs teaching grieving children meditation techniques modeled on her description. Her case fostered new academic fields, therapies, and cross-discipline. Truth could emerge in ways that defied explanation, while serving healing and justice. The central lesson of the Miller case was clear. Love transcends death. Truth can take many forms, and even in the aftermath of profound tragedy, healing is possible. 3 weeks after Marcus Webb's sentencing, on a crisp autumn morning when the maple trees blazed gold and crimson, Grace Miller made her first visit to her mother's grave since the trial. She walked hand in hand with Eleanor through Riverside Memorial Gardens, carrying fresh daisies, Jennifer's favorite, and something she had kept safe for months. Bella trotted beside Detective Chen, calmer now than during the trial. Her amber eyes were peaceful, her stride relaxed. Jennifer Miller's headstone was polished gray granite, beloved mother and daughter. Her love lives on in the hearts she touched, with an engraved image of a mother and child holding hands, Grace's choice. Kneeling, Grace placed the daisies neatly against the stone. "Hi, Mommy. I brought you flowers. And something else, too. The scary man told the truth just like you wanted," she said, tracing her mother's name. "He's sorry and he'll spend his life trying to be better. I think that would make you happy." From a distance, Eleanor wept quietly, feeling peace for the first time in 18 months. Grace opened a small velvet box, revealing her heart-shaped locket with their photos. Found with her mother's supernatural guidance, she set it at the base of the headstone. "You hid it to keep it safe from me, but I think it belongs with you now. I don't see you like I did in the courtroom anymore," she added, "but I can feel your love everywhere. When I help other kids, when Grandma hugs me, when Bella wags her tail." Bella approached, settling beside her, no longer alert to urgent unseen presences, only calm. "Detective Chen helped us so much," Grace told the headstone. Chen's throat tightened. Standing, Grace pressed her hands to the granite. "I love you more than all the stars.
I'll be good for Grandma. I'll help other people. Love never really goes away. Eleanor whispered to Chen, "Thank you for believing in her. Grace taught me that truth comes in many forms," Chen replied. At the car, Grace looked back. The daisies and locket glowed in sunlight. "She's happy now," she said with certainty. September brought new beginnings. Grace entered Maplewood Elementary with her butterfly backpack, eager for ordinary days. Mrs. Angela Rodriguez, her new teacher, quickly noticed her gift for sensing when classmates were hurting. She befriended shy children, calmed disputes, and understood grief others hadn't voiced. When Maria Santos acted out after her father's deployment, Grace suggested she was scared, not angry. When David Kim withdrew after losing his dog, she reassured him that love for pets never disappears. "She's our unofficial peer counselor," Mrs. Rodriguez told Eleanor. Bella visited twice a week through the therapy dog program, seeking out children with genuine trauma. Grace lit up when she arrived. "Bella helped me talk to Mommy," she told friends. "Now she helps me help other kids." Chen, now captain, led a unit for cases with unexplained elements, building a legendary closure rate with Bella. "The Miller case taught us to stay open to unconventional evidence," she told colleagues. Eleanor became a grief counselor and victim advocate, speaking at conferences about listening to children and staying open to hope. The Jennifer Miller Foundation grew rapidly, offering legal, counseling, and financial support to families affected by violent crime. Grace, as honorary youth ambassador, spoke at events, raised awareness, and helped design programs for children in trauma. Despite her extraordinary past, Grace lived a normal childhood. Soccer games, piano lessons, sleepovers, and bedtime debates. "She's remarkably well-adjusted," Dr. Williams noted. Eleanor advised other parents, "Her gift is just one part of who she is." By 10, Grace was still using her empathy to help classmates. On the playground, she sat with 6-year-old Sophie Martinez, whose mother had died in a car accident. "It hurts when someone you love goes to heaven," Grace said gently. "But love never dies. It just changes how it helps us." Sophie whispered she missed hugs and stories. "I know," Grace replied. "Your mommy's love is still there, in sunsets, in kindness, in what she taught you." Bella, now 8 and retired, rested beside them, muzzle silvered but eyes bright. "Bella helped me when I was really sad," Grace said. "If you listen with your heart, you might feel your mommy's love too." From the school office, Captain Chen watched. Over 5 years, Grace had consulted on 12 cases, helping solve 6 cold cases. In one, she guided searchers to a missing father's remains near a hidden waterfall after interpreting a boy's dreams. "Her gift has matured," Dr. Williams recorded. "She helps other sensitive children when it serves healing or justice." Eleanor, now 73, published Raising Grace, a best-selling memoir about loss, love, and miracles. The foundation expanded to 12 state chapters, funding victim services and research. At its 5th anniversary, Grace told donors, "My mommy couldn't stay to raise me, but her love keeps helping children through all of you." Grace's case reshaped the justice system. Law schools taught supernatural evidence. Police academies trained for unexplained phenomena. "Mommy loved you, you'll feel her still taking care of you." Grace returned for Bella, who rose slowly but still wagged her tail. "Come on, girl, let's go home to Grandma Ellie." Passing the garden, Grace noticed a boy sitting alone on a bench, 8 or 9, shoulders slumped under an invisible weight.
Eleanor Miller, now 73, had published a memoir titled Raising Grace, A Grandmother's Journey Through Loss, Love, and Miracles. The book had become a bestseller among families dealing with childhood trauma and supernatural experiences, offering practical guidance for nurturing spiritually sensitive children while maintaining their emotional well-being. I never expected to become an expert on supernatural phenomena, Eleanor wrote in her introduction, but Grace taught me that love transcends every boundary we think exists, including the boundary between life and death. Her courage in speaking for her murdered mother changed not just our lives, but our understanding of what's possible when we remain open to truth in all its forms. The Jennifer Miller Foundation had expanded into a national organization with chapters in 12 states, providing support services for families affected by violent crime and funding research into childhood trauma and spiritual sensitivity. Grace remained the Foundation's youth ambassador, now old enough to speak articulately at fundraising events and awareness campaigns. "My mommy couldn't stay to raise me," Grace had said during the Foundation's 5th anniversary dinner, but her love found a way to keep helping children through all the people who support this foundation. That's how love works. It keeps growing and touching more people even after someone goes to heaven. The impact of Grace's case continued to ripple through the criminal justice system. Law schools now taught courses on supernatural evidence. Police academies included training on investigating unexplained phenomena, and courts across the country had developed protocols for evaluating testimony that claimed spiritual sources. Marcus Webb, now serving his 8th year in prison, had become a model prisoner and active participant in victim advocacy programs within the correctional system. His correspondence with Eleanor had evolved into a collaborative effort to help other inmates process guilt and seek redemption. "Grace's forgiveness saved my life in more ways than one," Webb had written in his most recent letter. "I've helped 17 inmates work through the guilt of their crimes, using the principles she taught me about truth, forgiveness, and healing." Her mother's love continues to transform lives, even from beyond the grave. As the afternoon sun began to set over Maplewood Elementary, Grace helped Sophie Martinez dry her tears and walked her to the main building where her grandmother was waiting. The conversation had lasted nearly an hour, but Sophie's posture was noticeably straighter, and there was a spark of hope in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "Remember what I told you," Grace said as they reached the school entrance. "Your mommy's love is still with you, even though you can't see her. When you feel scared or sad, just think about all the ways she showed you love, and you'll feel her still taking care of you." Grace returned to collect Bella, who had been patiently waiting by the playground equipment. The retired police dog stood slowly, her joints showing the effects of age, but her spirit still bright and alert. "Come on, girl," Grace said gently. "Let's go home to Grandma Ellie." As they walked toward Eleanor's car in the pickup circle, Grace noticed another child sitting alone on a bench near the school's garden, a boy she didn't recognize, probably 8 or 9 years old, with the unmistakable posture of someone carrying a heavy burden of sadness. Without hesitation, Grace approached him, with Bella by her side. "Hi, I'm Grace. Are you okay?" The boy looked up with eyes that held too much pain for his young age. "My dad died last week. Everyone keeps saying I should be brave, but I don't feel brave. I just feel scared and mad and sad, all at the same time." Grace sat down beside him with the natural compassion that had characterized her entire journey through loss and healing. "Those are all normal feelings when someone you love dies. Would you like me to tell you something my mommy taught me about being brave when scary things happen?" As Grace began sharing the wisdom that had been passed down through supernatural communication and refined through years of helping other children,
Bella settled contentedly at their feet, her presence providing the same comfort that had once helped solve a murder and transform a courtroom full of skeptics into believers. In their living room at home, Eleanor had kept the empty chair from Jennifer's old dining set, not because she believed her daughter's spirit still needed it, but as a reminder of the miraculous way love had found to transcend death and serve justice. The chair sat quietly in the corner, no longer charged with supernatural energy, but precious as a symbol of the unbreakable bonds between mother and child. Grace Miller had grown from victim to survivor to healer, carrying forward her mother's legacy of protecting vulnerable children while adding her own gifts of spiritual sensitivity and hard-won wisdom about loss and redemption. The little girl who had spoken for the dead had found her voice among the living, proving that love truly never dies. It simply changes how it helps us, touches us, and transforms the world through acts of courage, compassion, and unwavering faith in the power of truth to set everyone free. The supernatural prosecution that had begun with a mother's desperate need to protect her daughter had evolved into an eternal legacy of love, demonstrating that some bonds transcend every boundary. Healing had been achieved, and love continued its work through the hands and heart of a remarkable child who understood that miracles happen when we remain open to the impossible and trust that truth will always find a way to emerge. As evening settled over their quiet neighborhood, Grace and Bella returned home to Eleanor, carrying with them the satisfaction of another child comforted, another heart beginning to heal, and another day in a life dedicated to proving that love indeed never really dies. It just changes how it helps us. Grace and Bella's journey reminds us that the connection between humans and our four-legged companions runs deeper than we often realize. German Shepherds, with their incredible loyalty and intuitive understanding, have always been more than just pets. They're partners, protectors, and sometimes bridges to truths we couldn't discover alone. Bella's unwavering devotion to justice and her gentle presence during Grace's darkest moments show us what we dog lovers already know in our hearts. Our dogs see us, understand us, and love us with a purity that heals wounds we didn't even know we carried. Every dog has the potential for this kind of profound connection. Sometimes we just need a little guidance to unlock the deeper communication that's always been there, waiting. If you've ever wished you could understand your German Shepherd, or any dog, the way Grace understood Bella, there are gentle, respectful ways to strengthen that beautiful bond you already share. Because every dog deserves to be truly heard, and every loving owner deserves to experience that magical connection. Your dog is already trying to tell you so much. Maybe it's time to really listen.